in Thomas Hardy's classic English novel, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Something happens to young Tess early in the story, something tragic for her family, for which she blames herself. And the reader is left to assess, was this her fault? Is she to blame? What are we to make of this and the other choices that she makes that follow out of this tragic occurrence? Whenever we engage in a story, it draws us into the lives and the choices of the people that we find in the story. And we are left to ask, what would we have done in their place? How would we feel about it? How do we judge other people who are in a similar position? And is that fair? One of the virtues of the stories that we read in the Old Testament is that they draw us into those same kinds of questions and puzzles. Stories in the New Testament as well. Asking ourselves, what would we have done in their place? How do we understand what's going on? What's happening? Did they make the right choices? We're gonna turn today to a story in Joshua chapter 2, which, if we're familiar, but it should surprise us. It should surprise us because, in one sense, it's a story that didn't need to be there at all. If you take Joshua chapter 2 out, basically, the story still makes sense. There's something special about this story being here, and it's surprising in a number of ways. So, again, these are some of the questions we ask when we come to a story. I think one of the fact that the Bible has so many of these stories about God's work with His people throughout history is that it does draw us into the story. And oftentimes, in a narrative, in a story, there's not always a clear moral that we're given. It's left for us to ask these questions and to kind of sort through how to understand it. How do we judge the character's actions? How does it fit into the larger storyline, both of the book of Joshua and the story of the Old Testament, and then the story of the Bible as a whole? We should also ask, whenever we read a passage of the Bible, does this remind us of any other passages? Or do we wonder how it fits with other passages? Is it mentioned other places in the Bible? And then, of course, ultimately, the practical question, what are the lessons for our own choices? The story picks up in chapter 2 of Joshua. At the beginning, it says, "Then Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, 'Go, view the land, especially Jericho.'" If you were here last week, you may remember the people of Israel are on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They're preparing to enter the land of Canaan, the land they believe God has promised them. And God appoints Joshua as Moses' successor, the new leader of the people. This is a time of transition, a time of uncertainty for the people of Israel. And one of the things God tells Joshua right away is to go forward, to bring the people into the land. He says, all the way, I don't have it on the screen, but all the way back in chapter 1, verse 2, "Now proceed to cross the Jordan. You," and chapter 2, we might expect that what's going to happen is Joshua and all the people are going to cross the Jordan. That's not what happens. Now, we were told in chapter 1 there were 3 days and Joshua's preparing the people to go across. So presumably this is happening in that interim, in those 3 days. But instead of Joshua and all the people crossing the river with confidence that God is doing His work and that they're following His lead, instead Joshua sends 2 people over ahead as scouts, as spies. Now, in doing this, he was doing the same sort of thing Moses had done a generation before. In fact, Joshua had been a scout, a spy, the first time a bunch were sent, back in the book of Numbers. And the particular focus here is the city of Jericho. Of course, it's famous from the story we're coming up on in a few chapters. And we might ask, why is Jericho the particular focus? Why is this the place that Joshua really wants to know about? Well, in one sense, it's because it's what's next. Jericho is where they're going to get to first. It's not too far from the Jordan River, not too far above the Dead Sea either. But Jericho was also, it was an old city. It was an ancient city that was a gateway to other places in Israel. From Jericho, you can go up to Jerusalem, you can go to Bethel. It's the way into the hill country. It's in a fairly desolate region, you'll see that later, but it was built near an oasis. So it's actually, and there are springs of water there as well. So it was actually a good place to live and a place you wouldn't have too many noisy neighbors. So the spies go, and they go to the place you would expect good, faithful, law-abiding Israelite spies to go, right? So they went, and they entered the house of a prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and spent the night there. And we might ask, what is happening here? What is going on? Now, scholars debate this. There are, as you might imagine, two different camps on this. One says this is very carefully worded to say that there's no impropriety, that they're visiting Rahab in her role as innkeeper. This is the natural place where people would gather when they come into the town. And there's other people who say, sure. No, the names of the spies are never given. They are not the main characters in this chapter. The name that we are given is the name of the prostitute, Rahab. The name of the main character in the first chapter of Joshua was no surprise. His name was Joshua. But the name of the main character in the second chapter of Joshua is a big surprise. Her name is Rahab. We wouldn't expect that a Canaanite prostitute would figure as the major character in the very second chapter of the story of Israel entering the Promised Land. This is sort of out of the blue, and it signals that something important is going on here, something that we need to pay attention to. Because as I said, this whole episode with the spies going across the Jordan, the story would make sense without it. If Israel had just crossed the Jordan without this whole episode, the story would continue going forward. The fact that it's here and that so much time and space is devoted to it is significant. The king of Jericho was told, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come only to search out the whole land." So, the scouts are there. Their safety is at risk because the king of Jericho, and at this time in Canaan, there were a number of small city-states. Jericho's one of them. So king is a lofty title, but really he's only the king of this little city and the area around it. There probably would have been at this time about 2,000 people living in Jericho, as well as some surrounding villages, at least best we can tell from archaeology. But he's aware the scouts are there. He knows, we'll see, about Israel's presence on the other side of the Jordan, and his determination is that this is a threat. These people are a threat. They need to be dealt with. But now, what's Rahab going to do? She has shown characteristic hospitality in the region. She has welcomed these people in. And now, will she turn, or will she do something else, something perhaps more immediately risky? But the woman took the two men and hid them. Then she said, "True, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they came from. And when it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I don't know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them." She had, however, brought them up on the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. Now, by the way, these stalks of flax would have been laid out to dry, so being hidden under damp flax probably is not the most pleasant experience, but it is preferable to being turned over to your enemies. So this is interesting, right? She chooses to side with her guests, to side with the spies. This was a risky thing to do because she presumably would not have been punished for just welcoming them into her house at first. But if the men search the house, if they find the spies there, and if she's lied to them about it, she is in big trouble. She's taking a risk here. But she tries to pressure them to make a choice to do something other than to search her house. She says, you got to be quick. They're headed back to the Jordan. You got to catch them. And we may wonder, why did she risk her safety? Why did she side with these men rather than with her own people? Surely that would have been the natural thing to do. There's also a question about how do we view her use of deception. There's a long ethical debate in Christianity through history about whether there are ever circumstances under which it's acceptable to deceive or to lie. I won't get into all of that today, but people come down on different sides of this issue, even in the case of Rahab. And then the question, will her actions be rewarded? Is this going to pay off for her? Will they search the house? So the men pursued them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So first of all, there's good news for the spies, right? The men who've come to her house take off to lose. They head right out to try to catch the spies. Well, so far so good, but then the gates are shut, so the spies are still stuck in the city, right? They're still vulnerable in some way. Before they went to sleep, she, that is Rahab, came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and the dread of you has fallen on us, and that the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Now then, since I have dealt kindly with you, swear to me by the Lord that you in turn will deal kindly with my family. Give me a sign of good faith that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. Well, this is the core of the passage, Rahab's speech and her appeal to the spies. This is actually one of the longest speeches by a woman anywhere in the Bible. And some of the themes that are brought out here echo things that were said earlier in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Both in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, we were told that the inhabitants of the land would be in dread of God and of the people of Israel. So for instance, Exodus 23:27, I will send my terror in front of you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And in Deuteronomy, no one will be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will put the fear and dread of you on all the land on which you set foot, as he promised you. And so Rahab confirms this to the spies, and then also she explains why the people of Jericho are afraid of the Israelites and why she believes that the Lord has given them the land. They've heard about the story of Israel, particularly from Egypt, and then also about the more recent defeat of the kings Sihon and Og. That's how the tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan came in to possess some territory over there. Sihon and Og had attacked the Israelites and had been defeated. And then because of this, by parallel, the inhabitants of Jericho can expect that if the sea wasn't a barrier to the Israelites in Egypt, the Jordan River won't be a barrier to them either. And then likewise, if the Israelites could defeat Sihon and Og, perhaps the Israelites can defeat them as well. It's a time of uncertainty for the people of Jericho. And in this time of uncertainty, the king of Jericho chooses to act in the way that Sihon and Og had acted, in a way, rather than the way that Rahab is choosing to act. In other words, he chooses to oppose them, to oppose their entry to the land. Now, we're not going to get into today, and I touched on this last week. We'll have opportunity for this later. I'm not going to get into today the ethics of Israel's actions and the way they came into the land and what they did and all of that and how that compares to what we're called to do as Christians in the New Testament. Those are important questions, but they're not really our focus today. Today we're looking at what's happening in Rahab's life and her situation as a pointer to what's going to happen, especially in the New Testament, and also as an analogy for our lives as Christians, for our spiritual journeys. So along those lines, Rahab believes that her only hope in this situation is not to throw her lot in with the king of Jericho, who she thinks is doomed, but rather to show kindness to these men who have come to her, and in turn to seek kindness from them. Now, they're at her mercy a little bit, right? Although she's in a difficult position. Even if they had said, no, we're not going to do what you ask, she can't. If she turns them over now, she's already lied about them being there, so it's a little bit of a tricky situation for both of them. But notice she does have some kind of a confession of faith, at least a primitive one. She confesses that the Lord is sovereign over heaven and earth, and on this basis, she acts decisively to try to protect herself and her family. And she does this by trying to throw in her lot with the spies, with the scouts, to join the Lord's side. Respond, because there's no reason to expect from anything that we've read before that they have any freedom to say, oh sure, you can come over to our side. That's not what we were expecting to happen with any of the people of the land. And yet, that's precisely the question that's before them. The men said to her, our life for yours. If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land. So again, the question is, are the spies right to make this promise, to invite Rahab and her family to join Israel? She seems like an unlikely addition. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the outer side of the city wall, and she resided within the wall itself. She said to them, go toward the hill country, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Hide yourselves there 3 days, until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way. The men said to her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us swear to you if we invade the land and you do not tie this crimson cord in the window through which you let us down, and you do not gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family. If any of you go out of the doors of your house into the street, they shall be responsible for their own death, and we shall be innocent. But if a hand is laid upon any who are with you in the house, we shall bear the responsibility for their death. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be released from this oath that you made us swear to you. And she said, according to your words, so be it. She sent them away, and they departed. Then she tied the crimson cord in the window. So there's some back and forth about how exactly this is all going to play out. And then they depart. They went into the hill country and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers had searched all along the way and found nothing. So this is some of the region between Jericho, between the Jordan and Jerusalem. You can see it's not exactly the most hospitable part of the country. As you're getting into the hill country. If they'd gone further, they would have seen better areas. But this is sort of to the Jordan. Then the two men came down again from the hill country. They crossed over, came to Joshua son of Nun, and told him all that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before us." Now notice that these spies are basically passing on just the information that Rahab told her. They're almost quoting her to Joshua. That constitutes their whole scouting mission, basically. They probably said other things too, but this is what the focus is. Now, this is a better report than the report that the spies had given in Moses' time. I mean, Joshua and Caleb had given a good report, but the other spies had not. So that part seems promising. But again, Rahab's role in this story, she's the named character, the spies are not. Her role is surprising because her profile is one that seems especially threatening to the Israelite mission. The great danger to the Israelites is that they will be drawn into idolatrous and unethical practices that were prevalent among the Canaanites. And who should be more a symbol of that than a prostitute? And even among the Canaanites, she would have been an unlikely character to emerge as a major character in the story because she was someone who lived on the margins. When she tells about her other family members, you may notice that she never mentions a husband, she never mentions children, right? Her existence is one in which she is denied sort of a normal family life. She lives on the edge of her community. Even so, she turns out to be the main actor in this part of the story. One thing she does in the story, of course, is serve to give the spies a good report. But her role here is larger than that. Her actions preserve both their lives and, I'm giving you a little spoiler here, but you probably guessed this, and it preserves her life and her family's lives. She will be grafted into Israel. And notice, although there's no comment about it, again, we're left to sort of weigh, what does this mean? What are we to understand about this? They violate Israel's mission. There are not negative consequences in the story to the spies and Rahab striking this deal. Rahab's inclusion into Israel, if we think about this in New Testament terms, it prefigures, it anticipates in a way the inclusion of the Gentiles into the church, and is a beginning of the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, which we mentioned before today from Genesis 12. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Well, in the context of the book of Joshua, we might ask, well, how are they being a blessing to all the families of the earth? This is a surprising instance in which someone from the nations is able to come in and join the inheritance of Israel. What's going on? Now, in the Old Testament, this is the only place that she's mentioned. There is also like a monster named Rahab, but it's spelled differently. It's a different character. But in the New Testament, Rahab is mentioned no less than 3 times. Now, that may not seem like a lot to you, but when you look at how often Old Testament characters are mentioned in the New Testament, it's actually quite striking. Because there are major characters in the Old Testament, people like Ezra and Nehemiah, who are never mentioned in the New Testament. There are some significant kings in the history of Israel, like Hezekiah and Josiah, who are some of the best kings, some of the heroes of the stories of the period of the kings. They are never mentioned in the New Testament except as part of Jesus' genealogy. And yet Rahab is mentioned no less than 3 times. Now, one of the times is in the genealogy, which again is surprising, because we don't see this mentioned in the Old Testament. This is the only place we're aware of it. And I'm paraphrasing this genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1. It says, "On account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Abraham was the son of Isaac. Later on, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. So Rahab's Boaz's mother, she's Ruth's mother-in-law. And Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. She's an ancestor of King David. And later on, Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, whom, not a significant way to be grafted into Israel, she not only comes in as part of the people who is sort of tolerated and on the edge, she actually becomes part of the line of the kings of Israel. And ultimately of the Messiah, Jesus. So these are the two other places in the New Testament where she's mentioned. In Hebrews 11, in sort of the hall of faith. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. Might be interesting to look at who's actually mentioned in Hebrews 11 and who's not. Rahab's an interesting choice to be put in this list of heroes of the faith from the Old Testament. Also in James, likewise was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? James, I'm not going to get into the details about what James is saying here, but the point is that her action that flowed out of her faith, her conviction that God was sovereign and that God was giving the land to the Israelites, it motivated her to take decisive action that wasn't just sort of going with the flow. She had to act in a different way than the people around her. And so Rahab is seen here as a model of faith in action. She has this chance to be rescued, this one chance, this one moment. And she seizes it. She doesn't want to miss her chance. It's a reminder to anyone that none of us knows the hour at which we will be called to stand before our Maker. And do we want to miss the chance, the opportunity to be saved, to receive grace and salvation through Jesus Christ? She also reminds us that God's family can include people we might not expect, people we might think are hopeless, people we think are miles away from what people in the church are supposed to be like. But then there may have been a time where we were that person, where nobody expected us to be here, where nobody expected us to be an heir of the promise. And if we're honest, there are things in our past and there are things in our lives that we think, how is it? Part of his family. I'm going to finish with this. This is a quote of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. He's talking here about people who thought they were religious and were resistant to the message that he had for them. He says, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you." Rahab was a surprising person to enter into the people of Israel. She's a surprising person to have in the genealogy of David or Jesus. And yet, it's not a sort of one-off. Right? People often who we think are miles away from grace, miles away from faith, are often the people who know their need and are just looking for a lifeline. And when the chance comes, they're not going to miss it. If that's you today, I'd love to share with you how you could come to faith in Christ and know that you belong to him and you're part of his people and you have nothing to fear in this life or the next. But maybe you're here today and that's not the problem. Maybe you're wondering, how did she get in the door? And maybe we need to open our vision to see what God could be doing in our community and our relationships in our lives.